Hello and welcome back to the Real Music Talks. Today's guest is Steve Helm, owner and director of Red Chilli Audio. How you doing, Steve?
Yeah, very good, thank you, and nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Yeah, it's great to be chatting again.
Yeah, it's been
So yeah, let's get right into it.
no
So for
problem.
people that have never heard of you before, how would you describe yourself and your involvement in the music industry?
I'm probably quite a hyperactive person that never sleeps or hardly ever sleeps. I've probably since the age of 1 or 2, I've averaged 2 or 3 hours sleep a night. So I like to throw myself into things. I'm a bit of a workaholic, only probably because I've got a passion and enjoy what I do. It's one of the things that my dad always said, that it was so important to enjoy your job. And I've been lucky enough to work in the music industry, which, has been a hobby as well as a professional sort of thing to do now for quite some time, really.
So let's take it sort of right back. How did you first get into music and how did things develop from there?
I first got into music when I was probably about 12 years old. A friend of mine wanted to start playing guitar and needed somebody else to play guitar with. And so we both decided to take up lessons. We had 2 or 3 lessons, and then decided more or less to do it ourselves. And then we started gigging at an early age, probably 12 or 13, around middle schools. And the guy that I was sort of gigging with is a guy called Mark, and he's the guitarist. Bizarrely, he ended up going on to be the guitarist in a band called Terrorvision, which is quite a well-known sort of rock band. And we used to gig together with various bands. And then I went on to session guitar for about 10 different bands. So I was doing everything from funk, rock, heavy rock, folk, and even Bhangra music, believe it or not. I was a guitarist for a Bhangra band in Bradford for many years. And then from there, basically did all the things that your parents tell you to do. So I did my O-levels, A-levels, HNC in business and finance, became a qualified financial management consultant, which at the time you don't think it's important, and then gave it all up after I saw somebody have a heart attack in the office at about 30, which was frightening, and went to work for Fox's Music in Leeds, which was amazing. Sort of that change from being a qualified financial advisor to suddenly polishing pianos and telling people about guitars. But it was the best move that I did. It meant that I could get involved in a passion. I started helping to do teaching of guitars, and then learned a bit of keyboard and the sales side of things. And from there, I sort of didn't look back. And I was lucky enough to then move on to more of a broadcast install type company at a place in Wakefield called KGM Studio Specialists, which they were the Droma distributors, and we did Soundfield. I helped build the anechoic chamber for Soundfield, believe it or not. And it was a bit of a baptism of fire at KGM, because we essentially dealt with all your pop stars. So one day you could be on the phone to Eric Clapton's management company, and then Def Leppard, and then you'd have people from Bucks Fizz turning up for things, and Black Lace, and it was a real mix. And then we'd deal with all the big touring companies at the time, like Wigwam, and we had a higher side of things, so we dealt with all the your recording artists from that side as well. So yeah, that was quite exciting, really.
It sounds like that move from finance to working in that music shop was pretty instrumental to your career. Like, talk us through that in a bit more depth. Like, what happened and why did you do it, I guess?
Well, you try and do the things that your parents want you to do, and do the right thing to study. So I tried to do that, but obviously, when you're still quite young, you like to do your own thing. And I'd always had a passion with my guitars. I just played for hours upon hours. And I think at one point I might have been playing for 10 bands simultaneously, and which was crazy, really. I was just living and breathing it, plus working, and I was teaching, and just, every single day doing things. And then from when I left KGM, I went to work for a distribution company, down in London, a company called SCV London. So I was lucky enough then to help develop Fostex multi-track recorders, instrumental in developing Genelex speakers. We then also were the pioneers really, alongside what's become Sony now, for Soundforge and Acid and Vegas Pro, Universal Audio and Marantz and LA Audio were also involved in that side. So I did the international sales for LA Audio. But I'm up in Leeds and I've sort of lived up here, and the office was in London. I had an office in Paris. I was quite lucky, but I was working really long hours and traveling all the time. And bizarrely gave it all up in about 2003 to set up my own company. Had I not done all the studying and the business and finance and the other things, I probably wouldn't have had the know-how in the finance side. So it actually came full circle to have an understanding of that, but able to encompass it in something that he enjoyed with the music industry. So I set up a company called Sonic8 back on the 3rd of the 3rd of the 3rd, believe it or not. And we started with Creamware from Germany with the audio interfaces. And then not long afterwards, there was a company called ART, which have been instrumental over the years for preamps and a lot of gadgets, and they work in the sort of the studio and the install markets, and we're very comfortable on that side because of the 9 years I'd developed with SCV. And so we took on ART, and then up until last year had been really doing that side of things, and also helping develop things like Antares Auto Tune for Europe, and F-Expansion with the drum machine software as well. So I think it helped having a passion for music and playing and being into computers and software, and all those sort of things came together then. So although you're running a business, you're actually running something that you're passionate with as well, which is invaluable when it comes to products, because having a true understanding of the products and its functionality, whether it can do the job, how it fits in the marketplace, whether you actually use it. I think it also helped with doing so much of the guitar work over the years. You were used to meeting people, and so when quite well-known artists came along, you weren't overawed with things going, because everyone's a human at the end of the day. You know, everyone starts somewhere and ends somewhere, and in between, some people are lucky enough to, you know, make it to the dizzy heights, and other people aren't, but everybody's equal, you know, on that side. So, you know, it was a good grounding to know that everybody's the same and treat everybody the same. And ultimately, I found that most people in the music industry are really nice and all have a common interest and a passion. So, like I say, I've been very lucky, really, that from the age of 12 getting into guitars, coincidentally, to, you know, right up until now, I still, you know, like playing and getting involved, but I've been lucky enough to use it as a business as well. Basically in 2014, that's when I started Red Chilli Audio. I'd got to that point in my life where I'd been doing a lot of things and working for other people, and I'd had a distribution company that was co-owned with other business partners, and it had been a good experience. But I finally wanted to go out there and, I guess, live by the sword or die by the sword on my own, to own a company 100% and do it exactly the way I wanted to do it, in with the types of products that I had a real passion for, which was obviously the guitar type market.
Makes a lot of sense. And obviously you've had a varied career with lots of different experience. I guess with Red Chilli Audio, do you want to talk us through some of the biggest challenges you faced? I mean, obviously it's not easy to start and run a business, and there must have been multiple hurdles that you've had to overcome. So maybe talk through what it was like at the start and what different challenges you faced as things have gone on.
Yeah, sure, certainly. Well, the first week I formed the company, I discovered that I'd torn my ACL, which meant going in for an operation just as I was going self-employed and starting a company. I got a cancellation, so discovered I was in a hospital bed a week later. And then during the operation, they fractured my kneecap, which meant 4 months on crutches. So all of a sudden, you were trying to make a living, you couldn't see anybody, you couldn't get out. I had a non-weight bearing as well as weight bearing for my knee, for my leg. But what it did was enable me, which you never have time normally when you're sort of trying to set up businesses. It forced me to learn things like how to develop a website, how to develop accountancy software, what really worked and what didn't work. I also wrote 2 books in that time as well, coincidentally as well, one on life on the road and another one to do with ukuleles, which were about to get published. The difficulty was getting out to see people and obviously saying, here I am, here we are, here are the brands that we've got. And usually with most distribution companies that are just starting up, it's very hard to get brands that are established. Quite often you're trying to develop things that people haven't done before. And one of those brands that I'd been sort of chatting with was a brand called Snail. And the first time I sort of got hold of the product, because one of the biggest things I found that's really important is doing your research with brands, so that you know whether the quality is there, consistency is there, things like pricing, and you learn this over the years. And had I not had the experience from the retail to the distribution, the install markets, the broadcast markets, I don't think I could have gone into doing what I did. So having had those years of experience and obviously the playing side, it gave me more confidence to look at brands and go past the fact that something might not have a name initially, because a lot of the time people will go, well, why would I buy that product? I've never heard of it before. I've heard of A, B, and C. And that's not always the right thing. You know, obviously marketing is a very powerful thing. Money can be very powerful as well for persuasion. But the bottom line for me is whether, for instance, with an instrument, is whether it's actually any good, whether it sounds any good. And, you know, you look at names over the years, whether it's the music industry, the car industry, and you think, well, what on earth does that mean? You know, what is that name? I won't name names with things, and you think it doesn't mean anything. But a few years down the line and people realize how good something is, suddenly they feel that they're compelled into that brand and that brand image. And Snail was one of those ones that when I got hold of it, I'd been lucky enough to invest in a couple of retail companies over the years. So I'd seen all the other brands on the marketplace. I knew the price points. I knew what the sound was like, the build qualities were like. So I was very lucky. So from the ukulele perspective, for instance, you know, I dealt with 50 other manufacturers, and you know, it's surprising how many there are and how many different products there are with it all. And when I got my first samples, I asked for them again, and then I asked for them again, and then I asked for them again. And the manufacturer's going, why do you keep doing this? And after the 4th time, I said, well, actually, I did it to make sure there was consistency. And what I found was with that brand, it was really consistent. The quality was good. There were things that they did that other brands had sort of done to a degree, but for the money that they were and the features that they had, they sat really well. And so then it was just down to the name, because the name's quite quirky with something like Snail. And a lot of people said people won't buy something that's a snail. But once you put the product in their hands and people tried it, again, well, actually, this is really nice. And you go, yeah, it is. Yeah. And you let people sort of decide for themselves. And that's the biggest thing, I think, as well with products, that you shouldn't be telling people whether something is good or not. You let them decide for themselves. And that was a challenge, like I said, to begin with, just getting the brands that weren't known and getting it out there. But having had 20 odd years experience in distribution and putting in, you know, sometimes 80, 100-hour weeks for several years, I was lucky enough to know clients from the UK to Germany, Holland, Czechoslovakia, Spain, and manufacturers, whether they were in Japan, China, America. And I don't know, I'm a bit of a traditional Yorkshire person in the fact that I sort of say things how they are, and I always believe in paying for things, if you know what I mean. So I'd always had quite a good reputation for always being a good payer and doing things right and starting on a foundation so that you didn't jump too quickly and slowly built things. And that really helped because we didn't try and jump too quickly. And then slowly but surely different brands came on board. So we've been lucky enough over the years we developed Prodeep in the UK for 7 years and did a bit of that side of things. And then just recently now we're working alongside a company called Enya, from China, but they're massive in America, and they're one of the biggest brands in China as well. I think they do over 300,000 ukuleles a year. It's quite incredible with that. But going back to the guitar point of view, it didn't happen initially, but brands like Richter then came on board when they could see that we'd got the passion. And Richter guitar straps are amazing. You know, they're all handmade in Germany, and they, you know, the owners there had a similar passion, and they were a family-run business and quite small in terms of, you know, the people involved with it. But when you look at the artists that they're using, you know, you've got everybody from Guns N' Roses to Rammstein, and you have people like the Scorpions out touring using them, and Lemmy's last products, you know, were products that he endorsed with them as well. So again, it was interesting, but it came back to the same feeling as that I'd had, that they were really passionate, or are passionate, about their products as well, and like to ensure that people are using it. Challenges alongside that, obviously the last 3 years challenges has been the COVID situation and not being able to travel, where a lot of the times it's nice to get an instrument and hand it to somebody so they can feel it and see it, and obviously you can't do that, or haven't been able to do that, and haven't been able to travel. So that's been difficult. Brexit didn't particularly help either, because we, over the last few years, we went from being a UK distributor to a European distributor. And we set up an office in Germany as well, and I've got staff over in Germany as well as the UK now. But obviously trying to get backwards and forwards and get products out has been difficult for that side. And then obviously all the laws changing in terms of sort of the VAT and the Brexit rules. And on top of that, we had CITES obviously as well, with the change of wood and the restrictions with things like rosewood, which so many instruments relied on having rosewood fingerboards. I believe we were one of the first people to actually move away from rosewood, and we ended up putting ebony on the fingerboards with snail, for instance, before it was due to change. So when the January kicked in for the first restrictions, our imports were already coming in with the right woods, and we just absorbed the costs just to give people a better product, but for the same money.
Makes a lot of sense. So obviously, like, the career you've had, you've obviously seen a lot of change within the music industry. Be good maybe to talk about the biggest changes you've seen, and also where do you think things are going in the future, I guess maybe for both musicians and consumers.
Yeah, probably it's the face-to-face side of things that's changed a lot in the industry. I mean, the last 2 years, I mean, most of our products, for example, we're going out to education with the retail, the install markets, the live markets, and export. Every single one of those markets stopped overnight, and the only one that was carrying on was the online market. And so we had to try and redevelop ourselves a little bit, as did so many retail stores around the world, in to change the way that they worked. It's a strange one in the fact that I see things changing, that there's so much more online now. But years ago, I said that the way forward for me, or I thought the way forward that I could see things working, is specialist stores. So that stores that really had the know-how and knowledge in a specialist area, rather than necessarily being a general store. So that it added value to those particular stores, so that there were still destination points. And at the end of the day, I think people love talking. They love physically seeing something. I used to co-own Hagstrom UK. And when it first came back, when Hagstrom first came back, and we got all sorts of people involved with that. And when you're doing the show, I mean, I was lucky enough to be doing a show in Los Angeles, and there was a guy stood next to me, and we just happened to be on the stand together. And I said, "What do you do?" And he laughed at me, and he said, "Oh, I'm in a band." And I said, "Oh, right." And I said, "Oh," I said, "Would I know it?" And he says, "Oh, it's I'm in a band called the Foo Fighters." And I was like, "Oh, right, okay." I was like, "Oh dear, that goes." But it was just so down to earth. It was Pat Smears, and he was one of the endorsees actually with Hagstrom, and I should have known. And you know, it was one of those situations where you're not really thinking, but that live connection where you're meeting people, seeing people, it'd be such a shame if that sort of thing disappeared. And I think that's so important in retail stores, as well as doing trade shows and public shows. I still believe there's a place that side of things. But obviously the online side has taken over to a degree with online sales for companies. And I'm hoping that we can get the best of both worlds. So you get certain products that are always going to be the same in theory. You get something like a microphone, for instance, and in theory, the frequency response should be identical, whether it's this one here or the other 980 in the other room for the same product, if you know what I mean. But whereas a guitar or a ukulele, they came from a tree. And I had this conversation back in the Hagstrom days where somebody said, I've just had this Swede, for instance. It was one of the models that they did. And they said, but I've got another one and it weighs different. And I said, well, of course it does. And they said, but why? I said, well, it probably came from a different tree. And you got this sort of blank expression. I went, well, different trees, there's different ages. You get different densities then. Different densities potentially mean different weights. And I said, that's why you get the contours that are different in the wood. That's why you can get different tonalities. And sometimes you forget that you learn all these things and other things that you think are natural, but people don't always know with that. And that's why it's quite important, physically seeing and touching and feeling things. And I think that's why there's always a place for the retail store and people visiting these sorts of things as well, and shows, where people can have the opportunity. So I guess to answer your question, I can see things changing to becoming more online, but hopefully we're going to see a lot more specialist centres that people will think, well, there's a destination to go to and worth travelling to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. And I guess if you put yourself back in an artist's shoes, how do you see things changing for musicians? Someone starting out picking up a guitar for the first time, or someone playing in a band at the moment.
Everything's a lot more accessible. Affordability as well, and the quality nowadays, you can get so much more for your money than you could do a few years ago because there's so much choice on the market. From a learning perspective, then embracing technology is quite a good thing, because things like YouTube, for instance, where people can actually go online to learn things. One of our brands with Enya, for instance, have got an app now that has chord dictionaries and actually shows the finger styling and other things, and it's all free. And when you can go onto YouTube and see how to play your favorite songs, and it's a visual thing. When I first learned, you'd got the books just with the paper, which can be good, but knowing how it should be played and how you should press and the sustain and the flexibility and your positioning isn't always obvious, where on YouTube and some of the other well-known platforms that you can see these things, it's fantastic to do. So I think there's a better opportunity than there ever has been for learning. It's more affordable, there's easier access to things. I think the only thing that we're lacking is really probably just more education and encouragement to get people into music. I think, whether it's us for the people that are involved on the professional side of things, or whether it's the government and other people, there is so much more that you could do, and it's very therapeutic. I used to teach people to play guitar years ago, and I had several pupils that had stutters. When they played guitar, they always wanted to sing, and they stopped stuttering. It was about 10 minutes afterwards that they realized that everything had gone. It was a really calming influence. And children that you teach that suddenly had that bit of encouragement that could do things. It was fantastic to see the smiles on the faces, knowing that they'd accomplished something, even simple things, just to play a couple of chords. And a few years ago, I went around schools just offering to do a free lesson for an hour, always with the teachers in there and the pupils there. And you'd get 10 or 15 pupils all suddenly playing all in tune, all in time, and the teachers go, I've never seen this before. And I was like, really? This is such a strange, but they were going, oh, this is great, sir, and all this other bit, that goes on. And you think, oh, it should really be encouraged. And if we could do more of that, we'd get a lot more people into the industry, which should be healthy for people. It's a great pastime. And that's one of the interesting things with the ukulele compared to some of the other instruments, is the diversification that you get. So it's a very equal spread with men and women, for instance, whereas I would say in the guitar market, it's very heavily male orientated, whereas with the ukuleles, whether it's a young person or an old person, people in between, male or female, everybody's involved. The only surreal thing is turning up sometimes to some of these ukulele evenings in a pub and you've got 40 people playing the Spider-Man theme tune all at the same time with grins on the face. It's a little bit strange.
Yeah, I can imagine. This would be an interesting one. I mean, obviously, you see a lot of instruments, you see a lot of different brands that you work with. What have been, I guess, a couple of major innovations you've seen recently?
Some of the innovations I've seen that I've really liked. For instance, if I'm allowed to do this, this is one of the products that we have, and if I press that button there, he says, basically a light comes on, and I don't know if you can hear that. There's a delay that's going on in there. It's actually got like a transacoustic pickup that's built into it. So it's not actually plugged into anything at the minute, but it's actually creating the feel of an amplifier as well as having delay and reverb and everything in there as well. And that technology is really interesting to see how it's developed for that side of things. It means that somebody busking can actually busk without an amplifier and things as well, or play at home. And the technology has moved on quite a lot compared to when I first started around about 42 years ago in the music side of things. And the quality's gone up as well on that side. So that form of technology is good. Obviously, software has been incredible. The development of software and being able to, loop and sequence and home recording has moved on. I mean, when I first started recording, you were recording on tape machines and you were splicing tapes and putting things together. And nowadays, you can do everything if you want on your phone to a degree. It really has moved on. And when Acid first came out, as in the product from which now is to do with Sony, with Vegas and all the other side, which was a looper. They also had a product called the Super Duper Music Looper, which wasn't quite as popular. But that pasting and stretching of sound and tone and looping things and adding things on and then adding effects has been incredible as a form of development as well, because years ago we didn't have any of that. When I worked at KGM Studio Specialists, the reverb unit was off in a room with a microphone into a wooden casing and filtering it back, and you got some amazing things. But technology's moved on so much with software, and from a manufacturing perspective, things like acoustic guitars and ukuleles, I guess it's encompassing the two things together, that technology that's gone into it with the effects and things as well. And then it's understanding things like different woods with tones and other things as well, which isn't necessarily considered as technologically different, but it's amazing what a different type of wood will do for things like sustain, for instance, and tonality. Probably just to finish with that one of the biggest exciting ones, obviously, going back to May Antari's days, was when Dr. Andy Hildebrand came up with auto-tune. He was responsible, I think he worked to do with shipping liners and like the radar systems finding oil, and he developed that, I believe, for fun in a way. But you look at now, virtually 95% of anything in the charts uses auto-tune, whether we realize it or not. I've been lucky enough to do some talks in things like Metropolis Studios and other places, around the UK, and some of the big studios, and bumped into engineers I've known, and they've said, we've got so and so in today and so and so, and yeah, auto tunes used on every channel of the vocals, and you couldn't imagine that years ago. And the secret, I guess, with a lot of that was that you don't know it's there. And obviously there was a famous incident a few years ago where the engineer probably didn't do as good a job as they could have done, and it was noticeable on a certain big TV show. But bizarrely, that in itself created loads of buzz for the product as well, because people were asking what it was. And obviously, infamously, Shares, I believe, was one of those iconic ones as well that really created that. And we didn't have that a few years ago, did we?
No, for sure. It's definitely been developing auto-tune. I'm personally not a massive fan, but I can see the appeal when you can't necessarily hear it on a track, and it kind of catches you.
It's the subtleties. Bizarrely, I'd supplied some copies to things like sort of some of the London music schools as well, that are vocal schools. But you can actually visually see where people are going wrong as well, and how things can be improved as well. So from an educational perspective, it actually can be quite good, as well as a functional process. And the other thing is, if you're a touring musician with it working in real time, I'm not involved in the company or anything now with things, but I still appreciate what it does. I mean, I won't name the names of the bands that go out there using it, but there's a lot that do use it. And I mean, I must have done, I don't know, 100 gigs in my time. You know, I've done literally hundreds and hundreds of concerts. And sometimes if you're doing a festival, it's really hard to hear yourself with the monitoring and things as well. And you can't always hear that you're going out of tune. So these sort of things can really help, because at the end of the day, you've got 20,000 people that you're performing to. They want a good performance. They don't they don't want a shoddy performance. And sometimes, if these things can help and put a bit of enjoyment into people's lives, then why not?
Absolutely. No, it makes perfect sense. So Steve, it's been great chatting today. We're nearly out of time now. But is there anything else you'd like to leave the audience with as we close out?
I better not crack a joke, otherwise I'll be remembered as a dad bod from that side. No, I just like to say, really, that for music, the most important thing is to enjoy it, and encourage people to learn to play an instrument and get involved, because it just creates a lot of happiness, really. And for me, that's the most important thing. If you can be happy, and going back to originally what I said for when my dad first said, if you get a job, make sure you enjoy it, and you can be as rich as you want in the world, but if you're not happy, then what's the point almost there? Whereas I think music gives you an opportunity to really enjoy and also share things with people as well, whether it's in a band, a duo, or on your own, and just sharing your music to other people. There's something good that will always come out of it. And for me, that's just great.
Perfect. No, that's great. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Thanks for your time.
Appreciate it, and thank you for your time as well.
Nice one. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time.